Today we're going to focus on chapter 11 for those who have the reference, the text that we've suggested, and for those who haven't, we will certainly revisit last month's major areas of interest, and then we will move certainly into really looking at motivation and working time, and it's entitled Here Come the Bad Guys. So we're talking about some of the challenges, some of the ways in which we either trick ourselves or get tripped up in not really actively engaging in the action stage of change and really making a conscientious effort to discard and restrict our acquisition. So we want to make sure that we're really looking at that, because we're in that stage where we're taking action, where we're really focusing on the things that we need to do, not only to declutter, but to sustain our efforts and to ensure that we're seeing tangible evidence of progress, and we're having the opportunity to utilize our living space in the desired manner and really getting that benefit from doing so. So don't be taken aback by term bad guys. They're basically the internal elements that really impact your motivation and capacity to really engage actively. So welcome. As usual, today's session is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority, and I want to remind you that this is interactive, and we want to get the most from you in terms of sharing your experiences and what are some of the feedback from your efforts to utilize the tools and the strategies that we've discussed. Once again, a reminder that the slides and recording will be sent to you via email after the presentation. I'm hoping that you are getting that steadily. If not, we will certainly remind the folks at DBHR to ensure that you are receiving that. Could anyone give me an indication as to whether they've received previous slides and recordings from the previous sessions? Just want to get a sense as to how that is occurring. Okay, so there's a mixture of some folks are not receiving it and some are. So we will certainly reach out and ensure that we get some sense as to when that is coming and how that's occurring.
I'm going to call her today.
Fair enough. So we are actually, coming down to the end of our 12-month session. It's been a long road, but we're really in the stage where we should be seeing the dividends and getting the benefits from our efforts, and certainly seeing the impact of how we have, first of all, really conceptualized hoarding and its impact on our well-being and our health and our safety and our sense of purpose, and really getting to that point to which we can develop or garner some level of control over our living space, our environment in terms of our possessions and how we connect and relate to those possessions and how they impact our ability to live our lives in the fullest, most meaningful way. And for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. The materials and, like I said, the recordings are available to you. We'll try to make sure you get them. You have to ensure that you're looking out in whatever email you register for. That's where the information will be sent. So you may want to also look at your spam folder and see if that's there. But just a reminder. So as a reminder, we've gone through from a sense of defining what hoarding is to really taking a conscientious look at how the problem impacts our lives. What are some of the things we are doing, whether consciously or not, that are contributing to this excessive collection of possessions and items that really impact and impair our ability to live and function and utilize our space in a way intended. And now we're getting into the mode of really actively discarding, actively taking action to define our environment, define the way in which we utilize our space and how we interact and how we relate to our possessions. So we're really going to be looking at motivation and the working time spent on discarding and really decluttering. And our final session next month on the 19th is going to be really looking at a combination of the last two bad guys, those elements that really look at taking on your brain, the way you think, the way you conceptualize your relation to your possessions. And then we're going to look at how we are going to maintain success, because it's important to ensure that the maintenance stage has the same level of importance and we give the same level of credence to all the efforts we have made and the success we've gained and how we sustain that. Because at the end of the day, the objective here is to become more and more empowered to sustain the success and to live meaningfully in spite and in the presence of our possessions and our collections, so that we are not resorting back to behaviors or actions that really led us to the problem in the first place. And thank you, Crystal. Crystal presented the PowerPoint for today's session in the chat. So for a number of folks who want to use that along the way, you certainly have that option. So that's next month. And let's do our usual housekeeping. We ask people to limit the amount of engagement in terms of really speaking if you're not directly addressing the audience, and you can mute in that instance. We will mute you if the background noise becomes challenging. If you're having difficulty with videos, there is the call-in information you can use to access the presentation entirely by audio. So let's take a look at last month's areas of interest that we discussed. So we asked folks to use the test out exercise for letting go. Really looking at taking those actions that really give us a sense as to where we are in terms of our readiness and our ability to let go of items. And we also ask you to take a look at my hierarchy form to really get a sense of the importance and value in which you have those possessions. Is anyone able to utilize those tools, those instruments? And did you find it helpful? What was challenging? What was meaningful? What did you have success with? Just kind of get a sense if anyone had the opportunity to practice. We talk a lot about the major dividends and gains you can get from this is actually putting those efforts and tools into practice. And Crystal also put the testing out exercise in there. So anyone had the opportunity to utilize those tools or discuss them? Very well. So if you haven't had the opportunity to do so, we're going to certainly encourage you as a matter of course to try them out. You know, like anything else, you can't be a great driver if you don't get behind the wheel, right? You have to get into that seat and understand the things that you have to face. But certainly it's a great opportunity to try them. Or certainly, you know, sit with your consumers. And even if you haven't had the opportunity or it's not prudent to, given where you are with that person, just review them with your consumers and see whether or not it makes sense, see if something that they're willing to consider down the road. Understood, Leona. I can understand that if you haven't had the opportunity to try them yet. But it's important to review them so you get a sense as to what they are and the purpose of using those tools. So when that opportunity arises, you're not kind of scrambling to learn about it in that moment. So please be reminded to do so. And there's a number of tools that we'll continue to use. Fair enough. So what's our learning objective for today? What is it we hope that you take away from today? It's important that you learn who are the bad guys? What are the bad guys? What are those thoughts, behaviors, and actions that really trip us up and really impair our ability to stay motivated, to stay on task? And we want you to take a look at what are those specific behaviors, thoughts, or actions that are presented during your sorting and organizing sessions. And we want you then to select and apply the relevant good guys. So those are the solution-based actions that really addresses those challenges. And we'll look at them. It may sound a lot complex, but we'll take a conscientious look at what the bad guys are and the relevant good guys that really are used to address those challenges. We want you to also consistently, as is usual, review your practice muscles. Are you getting in enough time? The duration and frequency of the action of actually sorting, is that making some inroads into the pile? Is it really helping you see some clear and definitive success and effort at really moving things along? And we want to praise your implementation of a reward system for working, because if you're putting all these efforts in, you're making gains, you want to make sure that you're rewarding yourself so that it sustains your motivation and gives you a sense of accomplishment, as well as really finding that sense of, I am making some conscious effort to not just declutter, but to resume living fully and meaningfully in the space. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to fully engage in the success, if you can actually regain that territory that you lost the possessions and really utilize them in a meaningful way. So a lot of great aspirations, and we'll hopefully try to get to most of them today. So we're always ambitious in this group, and we'll do our best to get there. So we're now in the action stage of change. And we focus so much on the willpower to move us along. So when we consider this particular stage of change in the trans-theoretical change module or mode, we talk about really that willpower stage or that action stage. And this is really the stage where people are motivated to change their behavior and are actively involved in taking action to change their maladaptive behavior, right? And it's using a number of different techniques to ensure that you really are able to get a sense of those gains and see your actions and the outcomes from those actions. Ironically, in most cases, this is kind of the shortest stage of change. So it's not an extended period. Oftentimes you see those change because you want to make sure that you're taking action over a period of time and then be able to assess the outcomes of those actions and to maintain the gains from those actions. Most people in this phase are working diligently to make change, and they're following a plan of action and taking steps to improve and track their progress. So there's lots of activity, evaluation, and assessment to see where you are in relation to your goals. The amount of time people spend in this action stage may vary, but it generally lasts about 6 months. We want this kind of action stage to be sustained for 6 months, so that we can see some tangible gains. And people really depend a lot on their willpower, but other supports as well during this period. So we're talking about really conscientiously doing what we need to do to get to the goals that we established for ourselves in the early phases. Any thoughts here? Any uncertainties? Everyone clearly understanding that we're in the point where, we're doing the do. This is not the speculation, uncertainty. This is really, we have a plan. We have a clear, definitive set of objectives and strategies we're working on. And we're constantly measuring whether or not it's giving us the gains that we're aspiring for. So it's really concrete, not too much ambiguity, just clear and definitive is what we're doing. So there are, like any stage of change, there's some challenges that come with this particular stage. First and foremost, we have to really take a look at how much time and energy we're really investing in this effort. As we talk about it, our exercise we should get to that point where we're probably doing about 30 to 60 minutes daily to really see some tangible gains. And I know someone would say, Earl, where the heck am I getting that time from? Well, the reality is, in order to really make some tangible gains, you have to commit and dedicate that gains. And it's not simply a matter of this is somehow the perfect time frame. It's really about establishing a pattern and a rhythm of working consistently so that you're able to really get the most gains out of it. So we really need to see people engaged in discarding for at a minimum 30 to 60 minutes. So you can really sustain that kind of internal motivation and tolerating the distress. And I think that's the biggest part of really having a dedicated amount of time. You want to be able to assess your distress tolerance along the way as you actually put in the work. Because if you're not able to really get a sense as to how you're tolerating stress or distress, it's easy to see or to find yourself kind of pulling back more and more from your efforts in order to avoid the distress. And by doing so, by taking action, by constantly sorting for a specific amount of time, you also get a sense as to how much gains you're making within that time and whether or not you need to up your time or keep the time as it is based on the level of gains you're having. Does that make sense in terms of why we dedicate a specific amount of time and a minimum amount of time and effort towards sorting and decluttering? Any questions there? Great. And oftentimes, I always say to folks, if people are somewhere within 45, it's not as much as it's specific to that extent. We don't want someone saying, well, I failed miserably if I only did 45 minutes or 50 minutes. That's not it. We want people to have a consistent pattern of dedicating time. We talked earlier about the specific time of the day where you have the most energy, where you're more focused, where you have your thoughts together, where you have all your instruments and stuff there. So it's about preparation and action occurring within that time frame. So it's not a mad scramble every time. You have a plan that you're really executing conscientiously. Hence why it's important to have the schedule and the dedicated time. You want to be able to really look at, and one of the challenges really coping with personal and external pressures, because ironically, as much as you're focused on decluttering, the world doesn't stop. Things still happen around you, right? You're still having people who may be supportive, who may be challenging you, who may be questioning your actions. There may be folks who may be saying, well, listen, it took you 5 years to get all this clutter in your house. You think doing an hour is going to make this happen, is going to have, get you back to where you need to get? Those are some of the challenges that you may have to really take stock of and really ensure that you are having the right supports in place. And that may mean cutting certain people out if they're not contributing positively to your motivation and engagement. And we'll talk some more about that. So you want to ignore the noise and not heed the temptation. Some of the temptation is also to be like, well, instead of, decluttering, I could be doing other things. Right? I could be watching Jerry Springer, whatever show is happening. And, I wouldn't have the distress of looking at this pile and realizing it's going to take me a while to get this pile down to where I need to get. But it's important to keep on track and ignore the noise. And like I said, that may include people who are not positively committing or supporting you. People who may be questioning, oh, you try this every year and here we are again, you know. You talk a lot and your aspirations are greater than your abilities. You'll have a lot of folks challenging. And some of it may be with good intentions. And some of it may simply be people who may not believe in your ability to actually make that change. So you'll have some noise to ignore. You have to be careful not to use short-term rewards to sustain motivation. And, you know, you want to be able, like we talked about, starting in certain areas and seeing those things change before you jump into the big areas. Now, if your major challenge in terms of clutter is in the garage, you don't want to start in the kitchen and the garage and in the bathroom all at the same time, because then it's going to be very challenging to see the gains and to really feel that you're making some inroads into the challenge. So you have to be very careful in that regard. And being open to receiving help and actively seeking support. A lot of shame and embarrassment is really associated with someone who has significant hoarding disorder. So to really get past that, it takes a lot of effort. And you may have to really put up with some naysayers in that sense. But you also have to recognize that your own pride and your efforts to really keep things from people could be, in many ways, not really supporting your efforts, because you can't do it alone. You really require a lot of support to really sustain these efforts. And therefore, you also have to be careful not to overestimate your capacity. You know, I'm just going to clean this room by myself, clean this garage. I'm going to go out in the yard. I'm going to clear everything out in one Saturday. Don't know if you know those folks who said they're going to clear out their yard in one Saturday. I know a lot of folks who are like, I'm going to just, get a dumpster and just throw everything in one Saturday. It's going to be clean as ever. Never works that way. As fabulous as it may sound, it's grandiose thinking. It's not really meaningful and positive. So you have to be careful to understand and have a sense of your capacity and ability and the time available for you to do this. So these are some of the challenges in the action stage that you have to be conscientious of and not fall prey to, not fall into that trap. So we really have to look at our readiness. The stamina and energy it takes to really address the workload and really get things in place. We want to find the courage to work on holding despite feeling tired, anxious, depressed, or even ill. And that may seem like almost opposite of what is natural, but it's important. We have to find a way or to support folks in finding ways to really move beyond the natural instinct to just take a break and to give up. Even if you're tired, that commitment to that hour needs to be a priority. The same goes with even if you have a level of anxiety that you're struggling with. We've talked about coping mechanisms to help you sustain in your efforts. It's important to commit and to really put in the effort that you plan and dedicate it to. And there's some characteristics in that particular action stage that is important to recognize. You need to shore up your willpower, modify behavior and environment. You need to be making changes along the way. There's lots of changes that are going to be important for you to be making as you move along. And really seeking and accepting support, even if the support is not to do all the things that you expect someone to do. Someone may say, I don't have the time to come there and help you sort and declutter, but I'm certainly willing to give you a call to remind you that at 2:00 is when you're supposed to be putting in that hour. So if I can just be the person who's going to be the person give you a call, or someone can say, hey, after you're finished and you need someone to really chat about all the things that have occurred or what you've done, I'm here. I have half an hour dedicated just to kind of providing that support and ongoing assessment with you. So I'm able to do that. Or someone who merely says, hey, if you clean that kitchen and there's space to cook, I'm happy to come over and, bake with you as we did in the past on Saturday. So oftentimes it's just varying ways of seeking, acknowledging, and accepting support so that you have not only a personal and individual sense of movement in the right direction, but other people in your life can actually see movement, even if it's incremental and small. Sometimes just having someone say, hey, you're making progress. I know it's a tough task, but you're moving in the right direction. That's important. And some of the tangible interventions that we use to really help support someone in those efforts, or to take those guidelines in our own set, if we are the person dealing with hoarding, it's important to really look at the motivational enhancement strategies. We want to be able to promote that self-efficacy, that sense of I can, I will, I'm capable, and to deal with some of the obstacles that are going to present. We want to look at cognitive behavior strategies to combat fear, anxiety, and complacency. We want to have that. We'll talk about, when those negative thoughts come into our mind. Are we catch it, check it, change it? Are we really catching those thoughts? Are we really looking at them, really assessing the veracity and accuracy? And are we then taking action to really address those thoughts in our heads? So we'll take a look at that. So there's some clear and definitive interventions that have worked, that have proven to work, and can be built upon, can become part of your repertoire and your toolkit for you to conscientiously and actively get some gains from it. So as supporters, as providers, as practitioners, there are some definitive ways in which we can support folks who are in the action stage of change. And we're talking about using specific strategies that we've discussed earlier, and helping people sustain that commitment to change. And that can be done in many ways: keeping on track, setting up a schedule, doing other things that are really able to support that person in their efforts. We want to be evaluating the change plan. Is it working in the moment based on the current circumstances, based on the energy level, the situation the person is in? It's a living, when we talk about a change plan, we're talking about a living document, something that can evolve and change with that person's rhythm, that person's actions and what they're getting. So there isn't, you don't have to hold on to the exact nature of the plan because you made it 3 months ago. If things are not in tune with where that is, you modify it along the way, which may reflect, hey, I started out in the kitchen, but I realized the kitchen, trying to declutter the kitchen brings up too much emotions that really stunt my ability to move on. Maybe I need to look at an area that has less of a safety or fire risk concerns that I can work on. Or it may be shifting. If your inspection is coming up and there's certain egress and areas that may create a safety risk, you may want to shift your focus to those areas in order to pass inspections. Then you continue to work on the other areas that are kind of not non-consequential, but less consequential in terms of an inspection. And so you want to consistently revise and review that plan, and to enlist natural supports. If you've had some significant gains within the home, maybe it's time to kind of gain some supports in the external stuff so that you can have that balance. Because you don't want to have, in many cases, look at things are moving positively along indoors, but every time you look out the window, you see the pile of rubbish in the yard that really dampens your sense of achievement, your sense of enthusiasm. So maybe you want to, if you have the means, to say, well, listen, I'm tackling the indoors. Maybe it's time for me to get some help on the outdoors, whether some college students or whatever, pay them a few bucks, buy some pizza, and they start clearing up the yard and helping you work on the yard. So just some thoughts in terms of the things that we can do to support people in the action phase. So let's look at the bad guys. Which of the bad guys tend to show up when you're trying to sort and really make some positive gains? The first is, it's just not my priority. I have better things to do. So in many instances that can happen. And it's an avoidance technique. And oftentimes it may be more than an avoidance technique. It may simply be a lack of confidence and a sense of self-efficacy. But it's not made a priority. Hoarding becomes the thing that you do if or when. It doesn't become your primary Focus. Another is avoidance and excuse making. And I don't know if any among us who have not been in a situation where instead of addressing the challenge, we do our best to avoid it and make as many excuses as you can. It's the most natural human instinct when we're dealing with a significantly challenging endeavor. Right? It's easy to say, I'm just too stressed out. You ever think, the great example I think is that progress note that you know you have to write about that person that you know you're going to be struggling with. You're like, I'll get back to that note later in the afternoon, right? And you do everything else. You get coffee, you clean up your desk, you do everything else other than starting that note. And just the smiles I'm seeing on the thing, I know everybody's been there. I know I have. So, or that performance evaluation that you should have done 3 months ago, and you're like, it's already late. There's no thing as late. You know, it's late is late. So you put it off. Can't do that. Because that's the bad guy. That's the kind of thing you trick yourself into really impeding your progress. Or going for the short-term payoff. Right? You move 10 things out, you clear out some space, and then you're like, okay, it's about time I get something to reward myself, and guess where you go? You go straight to the mall or to the weekend, what do you call them? Yard sales, and you're like, I need to reward myself. I got rid of 5 mugs, and I'm going to go buy 1 mug. Forgetting that the 5 mugs you got rid of was 5 out of 25. So when you add that 1, you still have 21 instead of, 26. So you need to be conscientious not to fall trapped to the short-term gains. Yes, Dacia. After Christmas craft sales are difficult. Absolutely. And what I found only recently is that I don't even think Thanksgiving was done before all the Christmas stuff were already out. I don't know what it is. I call them all the holidays now because I think the minute summer is done, it's the holidays. It's almost like you can, at the end of August, you can get Thanksgiving, Halloween, Christmas stuff all set and ready for you, all pulling you into the vortex. So you have to be careful and conscientious. You also look at the unhelpful belief about your stuff. All this stuff is useful, right? And we talk about the 12 scissors that you have. You know fully well you can only use 1 scissors at a time, but every one of those other 11 have some significance, right? I like this color. This was my summer scissors. This is my scissors that my mother used. This is the first one I got after I got my first craft kit. And you come up with all the different ways of maintaining stuff, or you attach some belief to it. If I hold on to this oar and this life jacket and this vest and this all the stuff I bought for kayaking but never went kayaking, somehow you believe if you hold on to the paraphernalia, you're going to actually become this expert kayaker that you thought you would be 10 years ago. Not happening. So you have to be conscientious. I don't know how many, you think of it, how many, I'm trying to think of the Seattle baseball team. The Mariners. Fair enough. How many Mariners gear you have, but you've never gone to the game even though you've set it up as an expectation since you were 18? Holding on to 15 Mariners shirts, some folks who are out of the league now, but you still have their t-shirt because you're going to go watch them play. They're not playing anymore. They're out of the league. So you have to be conscious about the things that you're kind of assigning a identity to. You have to be careful about that. And we'll talk some more about it. Overthinking and confusing yourself. Oftentimes we think of people who have 1,500 categories for paper. I'm going to tackle my paper. I'm going to organize every single piece of paper I have, but I have to come up with a perfect list that covers everything. And before you know it, you have 15 different categories for paper. And we talked about that before. Some point you have to kind of narrow it down to a reasonable stuff, because oftentimes the more categories you you create is a stalling effort. Because if you have to separate the Bank of America from the Wachovia Fund, from this bank to that bank, you'll never get moving. Sometimes you have to start with two categories. Important documentation and other stuff. And that's it. And you whittle it down from there. So we'll take a look at every one of these bad guys. We'll start with 3 today, and we'll look at the other 2 next month. But it's important for us to really see how they impact our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors, our feelings, and how it really affects our ability to maintain possessions in the way we desire, as opposed to it being cluttered. So let's start first with, it's not my priority. When we put decluttering to a lower priority than number 1 priority, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So you really have to ask yourself in your efforts, where did beating hoarding rank on your priority list? And if it isn't at the highest level of priority and it's important, you need to put it there. You simply cannot achieve a level of decluttering that you desire if it's not your top priority. So you have to schedule decluttering to the extent that it keeps you motivated and working at your best. To find time when you know you will be mentally alert to do the task and have the fewest distractions or competing interests. You want to stick to a strict schedule. We've talked about that at length, the importance of sticking to that schedule, but you have to make it a top priority. And you have to ask yourself, are you letting lower priorities things interfere with beating hoarding? Have you seen that where folks you are trying to support or work with really don't have decluttering at a top priority? And if that's the case, what do you find happening repeatedly? Whether it's their efforts or your efforts to support them, what do you find happening that is really impacting their gains?
Well, this may not be for the group that we're talking about in terms of people that are ready to work on it, but I think of 2 of my clients right now. I have one client that she was actually working with a different case manager in a different region, and she moved, and I became her case manager. She wouldn't let the other case manager come to the home or meet her in person. And at first, she wasn't even willing to meet with me. Last week, for the first time, she was willing to meet me in person, and we were going to meet in her place, but she was just too embarrassed.
Okay.
And then I have another client. I have a client who is washing and keeping recyclables in the hopes she believes that she's going to receive cash for them at a recycling agency. And she just does not believe that it's an issue. And I see it starting to, she lets me into her unit, and I've seen it kind of accumulate, and I've tried to talk to her, and she just does not see it as a problem.
And thanks for sharing, but what you just mentioned in both instances are very common behavior that is really sometimes unconsciously used to really avoid the distress of making the decision. And we have to be conscientious and careful that when those bad guys are presenting, we are not either getting beyond where the person is by demanding that they do things at a state of readiness where they aren't, or we just avoid the subject at all and try to kind of work around it. The reality is that you have to bring it to bear. This is what I notice, the conscientious thing. You're indicating clearly here that you're washing these stuff and preserving them to take them to the recycling to get some kind of monetary gain from them. Can you help me understand when is the last time you've done exactly that? And when do you plan on doing it? And if that's not the case, what is preventing you from taking that action? So in a thoughtful, compassionate way, really challenge that person's veracity for their plan. And you may get some gains like, oh, well, I'm trying to do that, but it's, it's overwhelming, or, you're not cleaning up, or you'll hear some of the excuses and rationalization. And you may be able to really address those stalling efforts right there in the moment. Or be able to say, maybe, have you considered seeking some kind of support? There are people who actually would drive around with a van, come and pick up your recyclables and take it to the recycle place. There's other supports that you can gain.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I've suggested those things. Like one of the things, the person who's holding on to the recyclables, well, I tried to figure out with her, well, where is this organization, or when might you be able to go? Try to find some planning around that to see, maybe she would find out that there's not an organization that's going to pay her for her recyclables, but she's not wanting to take the action.
And that's also is common and understandable. But it's important not to let it fall by the wayside and avoid the conversation, even if you have to have that conversation every week. But I'm hoping that, this week you're able to wash more and keep more. How about where are you stocking them up? Are they in a bag ready to move, to go? So sometimes you have to look at even supporting that person in their efforts to get things done. Because yes, it's one thing to wash them and have them piled up somewhere. It's another thing to have them washed, put in a bag, ready to go, close to the door, some kind of movement closer and closer to the objective.
Right. Yeah. Well, with this particular client, she had been worried about driving her car for a few issues. And one of the things that we're going to work on this week is getting her tabs updated. So perhaps with her tabs updated, she may feel a little bit more adventurous in the upcoming week to try to drive and find out if they're really going to accept her things. And that will be a whole nother issue, because my guess is in our state we don't pay for even like bottle recycling. So I'm guessing other recyclables aren't going to be paid either.
Which is entirely likely. And you may discover along the way that she's aware of it. And this may just be her way of just keeping things where they are, keeping things status quo, but have a good excuse in mind, right? Because she knows that if you challenge her in terms of the veracity of that statement, then she can always say, well, how dare you question my whatever, right? So sometimes it's a power struggle, even in the most unconscious way. So you have to be careful, but you also have to be factual about what's happening. But keep at it. Sometimes it's the little gains that make a difference. And maybe someone has not confronted her honestly about it as yet. Maybe she's waiting for someone to be brave enough to do so. So you have to kind of, figure out your relationship and where that trust is and determine how much you can really challenge.
Yeah, she made this comment the other day. You don't understand about my recycling. And I felt like, oh, am I not doing my job as, case manager, not trying to like create an alliance or support her.
Yeah. And it's called the okie doke, right? If she put it on you, then you can't challenge her. So simply what you do is to say, you know what? Help me understand it. If you don't think I fully understand your stuff, please, this is a great moment. I have some time. Help me understand it. Walk me through it.
Okay, I like that. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
But keep at it. Corey says, I find that many of my clients have or make other things a priority and do often use their health issues as avoidance. Legitimately, they do have health concerns, but it's hard excuse to combat. Yes. And as human beings, we are gifted, we are skilled, we are experts at coming up with excuses to do the things we need to do and avoid the things that we have to. It's just natural. So sometimes what that legitimately means is that we have to have a plan. That's why we revisit the plan that they made, that they committed to, that has some clear goals in mind, so that we're not constantly fighting the little scrimmages. We go back to, so help me understand your efforts. How are they contributing to your goal that you reestablish of decluttering? Always take people back to those goals and help them give you a sense as to how they see themselves in comparison to those goals in terms of their efforts. But it's a great place to start. Priority has to be in place. And when priority is a question, we have to keep the prize, the eyes on the prize. And we talk about going back to that goal. What is it you hope to accomplish by starting out in the first place? And where are you in proximity to that? What's your effort? We want to really look at the person's values and personal goals for organizing and decluttering. Take them back there. Always resort back to those goals and values that they established around decluttering. Do you still have those goals today? And are you willing to honor them? Look at what you wrote about, the likely consequences of not working on hoarding versus working on hoarding. Do these consequences still seem likely? So you never take that burden on and make it about you. You always resort back to, let's look back at the goals. Let's take a look at the goals that you set. How are your actions impacting those? Are your eyes on the prize? Do you still have those goals? Are they still meaningful? Are they still tangible? Do you still want the gains from those efforts? That's important for us to kind of make sure we keep in focus. And when we're struggling with the motivational aspect of it, we want to make sure that we're using some visual elements to help folks, right? The clutter visualization exercise and the decluttering visualization exercise that we've put in place. Because when people, it's a little more difficult for the questions to arise when things are clearly defined, particularly in a visual sense. So when we talk about clutter visualization exercise, we want to ask the person look around the room and notice the clutter. Turn slowly and see all of it, right? How uncomfortable it makes that person feel, and rate the discomfort from no discomfort to severe discomfort on a scale. And we've done that in the early phases. We want to go back to that. Want to have that person take a look and say, hey, what has changed? Are things the same? Do you still feel uncomfortable the way things are? And they may say, oh, this is just fine. My house is fabulous. I don't have any issues at all. And then you take them back to, we did this 3 months ago. And that was not your feedback. You said you were uncomfortable, you were ashamed, you couldn't have anyone in this house, you had no visitors, your social life was a mess, you just had concerns about whether or not you can pass inspections. All those things can really bubble back up to the surface by taking a conscientious look at where the circumstances are. So you're always bringing it back to that person's vision of it. And we look at the unclutter visualization exercise. We ask that person to look at, visualize the room, close their eyes, visualize it with all the clutter gone. Imagine the clear spaces and floors and tabletops with no piles and uncluttered floors with only rugs and furniture, right? What thoughts and feelings do you have visualizing that room without the clutter? Imagine what you can do in this room now that it's uncluttered, it's tidy. Picture how pleasant this room would feel arranged in a way you desire. And describe your thoughts and feelings. So we want to give that person a clear picture for themselves of where it is, where they want it to be, and what it looks like in their mind's eyes. And really get from what we call from the head to the heart, back up to the head, right? We want that kind of loop to occur so that the person is not focusing on avoiding the distress of discussing it with you. Because oftentimes that's the most distressing thing. I don't want to have someone judging me and telling me what how my clutter is impacting my life or how they think it is. You want them to be in that mode. Thoughts, emotions, feelings, all those relations to the things that they have in mind or had in mind, and how it relates to their current circumstance. So does that make sense, using that visualization and those exercises to really kind of hone in back on the goal and the purpose and the objectives and the strategies that were established? Because it's easy to fall into the trap of, fussing about an effort or a lack thereof, as opposed to the overall goal and the purpose of the person starting out in the first place. And I always advise that you take a look at both visualization exercises. Really great in terms of helping you understand the purpose and motivation of doing so and what it looks like. Go ahead, Corey.
I joined late, so I'm sorry if I missed this and it was something you already covered, but what strikes me in seeing the difference between the unclutter visualization exercise is how many additional containers that there are. And just thinking about like that as a resource and like them having like the money to buy those containers and to have the appropriate containers. And like just like the people who might not have like a cabinet, like money to buy a cabinet, to make it look like it's the same amount of stuff. It's just looks nicer, or if it's more, concealed and organized in a certain way. Anyway, so it's just thinking about like maybe how helpful it could be to have the containers to make it more feasible. I don't know if that was covered.
Very good observation, Corey. I think that's spot on. And what we always resort to, and this is important, this is my visualization. So for that person, they're actually taking photographs of their home, right? And then look at one that makes sense for them in terms of it uncluttered. So as much as this visualization is more, the ideal photo, we want that person to have that picture in their head, in their mind, as to what their home would look like uncluttered. So it's almost like a prompt as opposed to an ideal. Does that make sense? So that's important. I don't want this to be the picture of perfection that we're using. It's about that person creating that image in their head and holding on to that concept as it relates to their specific environment. Because there's no way for us to have the perfect picture of that person's environment. For some folks, they've been hoarding for years. They can't even remember what it looks like or visually, but they can create it in their minds as to what they would like it to look like or what they thought it looked like when it was not cluttered. So that's important. So what is important, and we talk about that when we want folks to kind of refer back to the change plan, is to use that outline, that change plan, to guide efforts and to give people a sense of where they are in comparison to their established goals or aspirations. So we want to take folks back to what change I wanted to make, really clearly narrated and defined in that way. The most important reason why I want to make those changes, the steps I plan to take to make those changes. So very concrete steps and strategies. So there's no speculation. And this plan really established for someone that point of reference that they can go back to when they're struggling or when they're making significant progress, to see whether or not they're keeping on track with their efforts. So that change plan outline is available to you as well. It's clickable in the PDF, and I'm going to ask Crystal to put it in the chat as well. So it's a great guide to use. We want to make sure you're constantly conditioning your practice muscle. We've talked more and more about practice muscle. How much time, effort, and energy you're putting into actual sorting and categorizing. We want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. The stamina and energy has to be improved and increase the workload so that you're getting those gains. If you haven't spent 30 to 60 minutes each day working on decluttering, you're likely not going to meet your goal anytime soon. So we want you to consistently work. It's like anything else. in order to get the most gains out of an effort, you have to build up that stamina and those efforts. And we call that the practice muscle. The more you put into it, the stronger, the more it can sustain, greater duration you can engage in. So you got to keep at it. It's not by happenstance or just, it has to be a scheduled, concrete, tangible way of doing it to build up that resistance, build up that sense of stamina and duration. And we ask folks, where are you in terms of their stamina? Where are you in terms of your practice muscle? And the person may honestly tell you, this week I was able to do just 15 minutes or 10 minutes, and then you kind of process, what's different? Did you schedule it? What was the distractions? Are you making it a priority? You go back to all those elements to kind of keep things on track so that eventually you don't have to be the person doing that. They can have to actually have that set of questions in their head to give them a sense as to where their practice muscle is. So when you ask, they can certainly tell you either how much effort they've put in, whether or not they're aligned with it, or what were some of the challenges to sustaining those efforts. So bad guy number 2, avoidance and excuse making. And if you're like a lot of people who hoard, you will notice yourself avoiding certain aspects of sorting and discarding or making excuses to others. It's just part of the deal. It's a lot easier not to do than to do, particularly when you're facing an insurmountable or very significant amount of decluttering effort. It's easy to fall into that trap, but we need to recognize it and not avoid it either. Because that's one of the challenges with people who are supporting people who are hoarding. They tend to avoid addressing the actual person's avoidance. So everybody's avoiding. Because as much as it's distressing for that person to talk about why they're avoiding decluttering, it's also just as distressing for a person who's providing support or providing service to talk about something that they know fully well is going to be confrontational, conflicting, and is not going to get, the nods. This is where you get most of the challenge. But it's critical and important for you to focus on really addressing and challenging those avoidance and excuse-making strategies. Classic excuse that promote avoidance. I'm too tired to do this right now. Resort back to reminding them. Part of the goal, part of the strategy, part of the effort, part of what is proven is that even if you feel tired, anxious, you still should keep your schedule. It's better for you to do slower, less, but keep that schedule going. I just don't have enough energy. What changed today? Did you not have breakfast? Did you not schedule things accordingly? What is depleting your energy? Really address that concern. Because oftentimes when people say I don't have enough energy, what they mean is I'm not willing to focus. I'm not willing to put in the effort. It's not really about energy. It's about the perception of what they're capable of in that moment. I'm too stressed out to work on my hoarding problem. Understandable. The world is a stressful place. But how is not working on your hoarding problem decreasing your overall stress? It's kind of a reasonable question to ask. Person may say, well, I'm concerned about, I can't, pay my rent this month. And that's stressing me out. Does that have anything to do with your acquiring rate? And the person may, that's none of your business. Why are you all up in my business? Well, we made a commitment to work on this specific problem. And part of the challenge we recognized in the early phases, it was you tend to reward yourself for 5 minutes of work by going to the mall. And that has a trickle-down impact because when you go to the mall, you come back short of your rent money. So maybe we want to look at that conscientiously and see that that's also impacting your ability to declutter because you're stressed out about your financial stuff when your actual hoarding behavior is contributing primarily to your financial challenges. So you may see that addressing one actually addresses the other. So in this business of supporting people with hoarding, it's not about bravery, but you can't avoid the obvious. You have to call it as it is. Thoughtfully, compassionately, empathetically, you have to call it. I would be able to tolerate it if I felt bad. Typically, people say that. The minute I, get to the point where I look at my kitchen and I realize I haven't cooked in a year, I'm going to feel bad, and then I don't have the energy to continue to try to declutter it. I'm going to ask you, if you had any instance where you felt something was going to feel bad and you did it anyway. Yes. Give me an example of that, because maybe there's something within you that can help you, overcome this particular obstacle that you've already practiced before, that you really have to draw upon, that you may not be conscientious that you have that capacity. Yeah, I remember the last time I had my rental, issues. I realized I needed to stop, doing ABCD to maintain my rent, or the minute I get my SSI check or my SSD check, I need to put aside my rent, or I need to pay it directly on a direct deposit or whatever. I've done that before. Same thing applies. There's no problems that is insurmountable. It's your perception of that issue and how you're able to address it. You may not be able to overcome it fully, but halfway is better than not at all. So you really have to look at really addressing those concerns without pretending that they're not really avoidance. They are. Call it for what it is. Now, you don't have to tell that person, I know you're avoiding stuff. That's not the way you do it. You really ask that question with a follow-up question. Is that really what it is? Let's take a look at it. Let's examine that concern. I hear you, but let's examine what you're saying. Does it have some validity to it? And the ultimate gain is, what I really need is a large home or additional storage space, and then I wouldn't have a hoarding problem. No, you likely wouldn't have a hoarding problem in your view, but what you'll have is a problem beyond hoarding. Because if you can barely pay your rent with the circumstances you have, don't you think it's going to cost you more to have additional space to store the stuff that is not bringing in an income? There's some conscientious reality testing that you can do, right? And if the problem is reducing and minimizing and prioritizing the stuff that you have, how is getting more space to get more stuff going to help you declutter? So there's some clear, definitive questions that you can ask that really challenges, thoughtfully, those excuses that promote avoidance. And there's some ways of thinking it through. You want to go through that process, right? You want to be able to have that person process those upsetting or emotional or vulnerable feelings. And oftentimes they can underestimate their capacity and commitment. So you want to make sure that you're challenging those things in a reasonable way. It's easy for that person to resort to just feeling emotional overload and perceived inability to cope. And sometimes what that means is by saying those things, they're asking you to help them clarify whether or not their initial thought is accurate. So that's important to really challenge those elements. Is that person catastrophizing? Imagining the worst will happen and be intolerable, and it will be intolerable. If I do A, B, C, D, all of this is going to happen. You want to test that. You want to think it through that process. Are they discounting the positive? I've done some decluttering, I've done some categorizing, but it's never going to be enough, right? And we always talk about that whole concept of if it took you 50 yards to get into the forest, it's not going to likely take you 49 to get out. It's going to be 50 to get out. So you have to give it time, an opportunity. Because we didn't get to this mountain of a problem yesterday. And therefore, we're not going to immediately resolve it today. But there's a way of moving progressively towards getting where we need to get. So we want to test out the validity of the assumptions, particularly when people have that catastrophizing concept that, oh, everything is going to just fall apart, right? Most of the times when we allow ourselves to imagine the worst and stick with the image of it while it really starts to really challenge our reality-based thinking. So we want to make sure that we are taking the time to really process that. You imagine the worst that can happen if you experience an unpleasant feeling. And rate the vividness of that, the scariness of that thought on a scale of 1 to 10. If you don't go to that yard sale on Saturday, what's the worst that can happen on a scale of 0 to 10? And I want you to keep thinking about it uninterrupted for 10 minutes. Just give that person a chance to just sit with it for 10 minutes. And as that time passes, you begin to really question, does that worst case scenario seem to feel less and less realistic or even a bit trivial? That, that first negative thought, if you sit with it for a moment, it sometimes elapses or sometimes really lessens the intensity. So we have to be able to test that out without resorting to action immediately upon that first feeling of negativity. So there's a lot of ways of testing it out, and the Buried in Treasure reference does give you clear, definitive ways of testing it out, some scales that you can use. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I want you to know that's available, that you can use that. So don't be afraid to test out the validity of your thinking, right? Think about the worst case scenario and really go through that process. And if you did that, what would be the worst thing that can happen? And even if the worst things happen, what's so bad about it? Feeling in that moment sad. Sadness does not last forever, right? Apprehension does not last forever. And it may seem like when you're in it, it's like it's forever. It's the rest of your life. But there's a way of testing it out in that moment. You can actually look at, how long do you think it would take to recover after you feel that way? And some examples may be in that person's life scheme, whether they've had similar experience or experiences that are proximal to that, and how they have actually been able to tolerate it over a period of time. I always think of that moment of, when you have that ball game as a kid and it's rained, and it rain out that game, and you're thinking, oh, my life is over, I didn't get to play the game, and you're sitting there realizing, hold on a minute, I've got lots of more games in my life that I'm going to have to, prepare for. And there may be rain on many instances. But it takes some time to process it. It's not beyond your capacity. It just sometimes takes that mindfulness to sit in that emotion for a moment and process it. Or sometimes just sitting it and just accept that that's what it is. It doesn't have to be processed to the extent that you have to feel better in that moment. You may just have to experience and say, it's okay to feel anxious. And my life is not end because I'm feeling anxious in the moment, or uncertain, or fearful. So there's steps to really testing the hypothesis of those negative things, right? And we look at the specific item. How would you feel to let go of that item? Particularly a prized stuff. Let's think of a prized possession that person has, but it's 1 of 10. And you want to test the hypothesis that if I let go of this particular one, somehow catastrophe is going to ensue. How bad would the feeling be on a scale of 0 to 10? And the person may say, oh, I'm going to feel at 8. I'm just going to feel terrible if I let go of this particular dress, even though I haven't worn it in 3 years and I know it can't fit. But it's my best dress. I bought that dress with my first check and my first job, and yada, yada, yada. All the other things that really associate with really having that feeling attached to it. How long would it take to get over the feeling? What outcome would happen if you let go of the item? And how difficult would it be to recover if that bad outcome occurred? So really processing step by step the emotional relations to that item and how you can process those feelings and sit in those feelings and move through those feelings, as opposed to believing that that particular feeling is going to exist for infinitum. And it doesn't mean that the person is going to say, yeah, I'm happy to get rid of this item. No, it may literally be like, well, I realize that I'm not going to die, but I'm still holding on to this item for a week. But then you can actually say, well, after that week, we'll test it out again and see if things are different. Maybe you'll be able to process it differently after a week. So it's a process. As you know, there's no miracle here. This is a painstaking process oftentimes. Bad guy number 3, going for the short-term payoff. We've all been there. The path of least resistance. We all have a tendency, a natural tendency to do what feels best in the moment instead of what is good for us. Particularly when we see a treasure, right? This shoes is so different. This is the perfect shoes for that occasion. I have to get it despite having 10 wedge heel that look similar. This is the perfect red. There's no other red like this shoe. You know, we come up with all those ways of rationalizing why we should buy this item, even though we have 10 of them already we haven't used. Or when you see a bargain that you can't forgo. What is important to note is when we're talking about the short-term payoff, we're talking about recognizing those cognitive distortions that keep us in that mode. And there are a number of them that really impact our ability to really avoid the short-term payoff. From the emotional reasoner to the all-or-nothing thinker to the catastrophizer to the uncertainty hater. And there's, like I said, a litany of cognitive distortions that we often can allow to take over our processing in that moment. Are these familiar to you? Are any of these cognitive distortions familiar to you? Fantastic. So these are familiar. Great. Because we certainly sometimes don't recognize them in the heat of the moment. That's what we're actually doing. We're really giving into those cognitive distortions. Because in that moment, it feels like, no, this is just for this unique circumstance. This is specific to this. Oftentimes, it isn't as much. When we talk about emotional reasoning, we're talking about believing things are true because they feel true, right? I feel in this moment that if I buy this red shoe or red dress, I'm going to look the best in that whatever occasion it is, right? When you go to that college reunion or high school reunion, this particular red dress, everyone is going to forget, you know, all the things that you did in college that made everybody mad. Everyone is going to see you as an angel in this red dress, and you're going to get all the compliments, and they're going to, you know, forget all the things that happened, or somehow you're going to show up, and people are going to be so thoughtful and compassionate to you, even though throughout your entire high school, they were just terrible to you. That's not going to happen because of a red dress, but it's easy to think that. Because in your mind, you see yourself in that dress looking as fabulous as an angel, and therefore everyone should treat you like an angel because you feel like you'll be an angel in that dress. That's not real. That is a cognitive distortion. It's you emotionally reasoning through your own anxiety about really recognizing that that's not important in that moment. Similar to the all or nothing thinking, you're thinking extremes, you're either successful or a failure. If I can't clear up this room in 2 hours, then I might as well just quit. I'll never be able to declutter my entire house because I haven't been able to clear up the entire backyard in one Saturday. Kind of all or nothing thinking. And it's important to recognize that, right? You can't see things in absolute terms. Even if you're seeing it, you have to be able to test it out. Is what you're experiencing in that feeling in that moment true? You want to stop and identify the slip-ups and examine the evidence. If you're thinking, it's distressing to sort of organize this stuff, so I'll just leave it here. What is going to be the outcome of that? I feel uncomfortable about discarding this stuff, so it means I should just keep it. Those are the distorted thinking that keep us in a state of decluttered environment. And it's important for us to recognize that. And we often say, you know, we should trust our gut feeling. What do we know about trusting your gut? It may not be as simple as it sounds. We have to have some evidence to support that. Because you can trust your gut that you have the winning ticket on the scratch-off. Don't mean that you should spend your salary on that ticket. That's the reality of life. So it's really about having a way, a filter, to really process those initial thoughts and feelings and see whether it is distorted or really is supported by evidence. There has to be a line of judgment that you don't blur. And even when it's blurred, you have a mechanism to test the reality of it. And we think about, and we've talked about it earlier, the cognitive behavior strategy of cognitive restructuring, right? When we have those negative thinking patterns that derails our effort, how do we really address that? And we use, particularly in this line of work, the cognitive restructuring element. We want to challenge and change the unproductive and unhealthy thoughts that inform our behavior. And we talk about catch it, check it, change it. Really an approach that helps us really catch the thought. That thought that we know that is impacting our ability to move forward and do something that we set up as a strategy or a goal for ourselves. We want to check it. Is it credible and true? Is the thought credible and true? We have a way of testing to determine the credibility and veracity of that thought. And then once we recognize that it's not supported by evidence, it is important for us to take action to change it. And what is a more accurate, helpful thought? And in that moment, it may be, I don't truly have the means to buy this additional dress, and therefore I should pause, go home and reassess my wardrobe to determine whether or not it was so essential as I thought in the moment. Or similarly, if you're tackling a specific area, you may want to take a look at it and say, I know, from evidence or from reasoning that I can't clear an entire yard in a Saturday by myself. It's not feasible. It's not practical. But in the moment, I felt that adrenaline rush. I felt like I need to get this done in Saturday, otherwise I'll feel like a failure. But no, it's an anxiety-provoking thought, and there's a way of testing it out and changing it. So this is a great strategy or intervention that we use to really help restructure those cognitive thoughts that really impede our ability to move progressively towards our goals. Examine the basis for your decision. Why is it likely to be the most stressful or difficult part of the program? Because in many instances, you have to risk not having something when you need it and get rid of things that you like. That was part of the initial discourse about this effort. If you're trying to declutter, it's going to require you getting rid of stuff that you may think you need, that you may think is important, that you may think is valuable, in order to be able to utilize your space in the desired way. Hence why you're tackling this problem and not accepting your life as it is. So you really need to examine your efforts on the basis for making decisions about holding on to stuff or discarding it. And stress is actually a part of it. So it's almost important to recognize that stress is not necessarily negative in its own right. Feeling stressed in the moment of making a decision doesn't mean the decision is wrong or unhelpful or unproductive. It simply means that you are dealing with something that's critical, and therefore you want to be able to process it in a way that helps you determine your movement towards your goal. And we try to do the testing out exercise once again. Each one of these particular strategies has a way of testing out the veracity and validity of those efforts and those thoughts that really impede our progress. So for every bad guy, there is a way of testing out the validity, accuracy, and impactful nature of that thought. It's important to look at the forest, not just the trees. And why we say that? Because earlier in this process, you identified important reasons for decluttering and beating hoarding. And those needs and goals definitely more important than a short-term payoff. So it's important why we say, make sure you're looking at the big picture. Go back to your goals. Go back to those objectives that you established. Go back to that value, that reason for wanting a decluttered space, wanting to utilize your house in a meaningful way, wanting to have your space clear and clean and tidy, wanting to make sure you can sustain your housing by passing inspection, wanting to make sure the safety elements are in place so that you're not at risk of harm by maintaining stuff in ways that are not healthy and safe. So it's important to really look at the big picture continuously. Are you giving yourself credit for the progress you've already made? Do you have a way of assessing your movement progressively towards your goals? Are you revisiting your plan and modifying it along the way to ensure that you're keeping on track with your current circumstances so your efforts are aligned accordingly? Are you making a genuine commitment to rewarding yourself? Having a reward system so that you can feel that sense of purposeful gains and ensuring that you shore up your motivation by ensuring you have a reward. We talked earlier in this process about establishing a reward system, whether that's after you finish an hour of decluttering, you're able to go for a walk, or you're able to eat your favorite meal, or you're able to watch your favorite show, or you're able to do something fun. Whatever reward system you set up, you want to make sure you're committing to doing so that you're not falling off from that effort. And if you're not doing that, if you're not rewarding yourself after each session, meaningful, gainful session, you want to make sure you resort back to doing so, because that's what's going to sustain you. Like most of us, we want some kind of rewards from our efforts. Have you stuck to your plan? Sticking to that goal of decluttering and utilizing your space meaningfully has to be a top priority and has to be tangible in a way for you. And don't forget your practice muscle. You have to consistently schedule and implement that hour, 30 to 60 minutes minimum of efforts to declutter, efforts to categorize and maintain your efforts. So I want, if you can, to take a minute or so to complete the evaluation, give us some feedback. But it's important for us to recognize that in the effort of taking action to declutter, to organize, and to discard, there's some clear and definitive things that are going to be evident. It's going to be anxiety-provoking. It's going to be stressful. It's also going to be something that we have to measure by evidence. We have to be able to challenge our thoughts and really put in place testing out strategies to enable us to filter those thoughts, to check for the veracity and accuracy of those thoughts so that we're not acting on those initial thoughts and resorting to practicing those cognitive distortions that really drive us away from our goals as opposed to towards our goals. So while you're doing so, as is usual, what's important is that we practice what we've learned. So the learning application for this month, and we'll check with that next month, is to ensure that you share the clutter visualization exercise and the unclutter visualization exercise and the downward arrow, which really helps us kind of process and check for validity of our thoughts. So hopefully you get a chance to try those out and see how helpful they are, or how challenging they may be, and how useful they are in your circumstance. And look forward to seeing you again for our last final wrap-up session. We evaluate our whole process and see what gains we've accomplished. On the 19th of next month, same time, the same link occurs, and we'll be addressing chapter 12. Here come the bad guys. We're taking on your brain, really going beyond those thoughts, really into the those significant cognitive barriers that really impact our ability to move forward. And we'll also look at what steps and strategies we're going to take to maintain the success that we've gained so far, whether or not we're where we are in terms of success. And Crystal shared today's presentation and evaluation in the link. Please take a moment to give us some feedback. We certainly want to know how the training really helps you in your day-to-day, supports the folks with hoarding disorder or people with challenges in terms of cluttering. And give us some feedback on what we can do differently or what we can add to the training to make it as useful as possible to you. So we have a moment or so, and I want to thank you and appreciate your time and attention and participation in today's session. I'd like to remind you once again that we're going to make every effort to get those slides and recording to you. And don't forget to check out our Foundational Community Supports newsletter for all things FCS and upcoming training events as well. And thank you. So if there's any questions, we have like a minute or so, I can certainly respond to any questions. But if there are no questions, I want to wish you a great rest of the day. And thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next month.